Hey heroes, and welcome to another interdimensional episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we've looked at the origins of Reed Richards, a child prodigy whose genius was nurtured by his father Nathaniel and eventually grew up to become a world-renowned adventurer and superhero Mr. Fantastic, leader of the world-famous Fantastic Four. This is not his story. This week, rather than looking at the Marvel Universe, Earth 616, we're turning our focus to one of the notable alternate worlds in the multiverse, Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe. In this reality, Reed was the child of Gary and Mary Richards. Growing up in Queens, New York with two younger sisters, this Reed had a tumultuous home life. This was largely due to the fact that his father, Gary, resented Reed for being physically weak and became frustrated whenever the boy indulged in his curiosity by disassembling various household appliances. Reed's mother, Mary, cared for him and tried to get him to open up to her about his troubles, but she was unable to curb her husband's violent tendencies. School sometimes threatened to be just as bad, as Reed was often the target of bullying and harassment. However, this was somewhat ameliorated by his friendship with Ben Grimm, a much larger and tougher boy who was by Reed's side throughout their shared childhood. As the two boys grew up together, Ben's potential as a football linebacker was noted as early as the 4th grade, and he often used his strength to defend Reed when he got into trouble. Of course, this also meant that Gary Richards showed more of an appreciation and admiration towards Grimm than he did his own son. In any event, despite having very different interests, Reed and Ben genuinely supported one another in their passions and endeavors. For Reed, one such endeavor was embarked upon when he discovered the existence of another layer of reality, one that would subsequently be dubbed the N-Zone. With Ben's help, he constructed a device to peer into that other dimension, although one night this machine failed and exploded, causing Reed to catch more verbal abuse from his father. But within half a year, Reed refined his technology, and when he was in 5th grade, he presented a device capable of sending matter into the end zone at the Midtown Middle School Science Fair. This caught the attention of a man named Lieutenant Lumpkin, a government employee working for the Director of Mainland Technology Development. Tasked with finding and recruiting exceptionally gifted young people, Lumpkin brought Reed to a government facility in Midtown Manhattan called the Baxter Building, where he joined a think tank of fellow child prodigies. His parents agreed to this partly because the government would be paying them for Reed's work, but Gary was also relieved to get his son out of the house. At the Baxter Building, Reed's projects were overseen by the world-renowned scientist Dr. William Storm, who explained that while he and his colleagues were already aware of the N-Zone's existence, Reed was the first one to successfully access it. Of course, it was also here that Reed met Storm's two children, Susan and Johnny. Over the following 5 years, Reed continued studying the N-Zone, but had little luck in unlocking its secrets. But then one day he returned to his room to find a fellow genius named Victor Van Damme looking over his notes and adjusting his equations. Reed was initially furious over this invasion of privacy, but soon came to realize that Victor's help might be just what he needed. And so he proposed that the two work together, with Victor assisting Reed's end-zone calculations while Richards aided Van Damme with his miniature robotics. This continued for another 5 years before they began construction of a large-scale device designed to teleport matter from one location to another by sending it through the parallel dimension. Reed even invited his childhood friend Ben Grimm to attend the machine's initial test in the Nevada desert. However, Van Damme believed that Reed's superposition calculations were flawed, and at the last minute he arrogantly and secretly altered them, changing the machine's delicate settings without having anyone else check his work. As a result, the teleporter malfunctioned, and while they only intended on sending a single apple for the initial test, an eruption of energy engulfed and scattered those closest to the blast, including Reed, Victor, Susan, Johnny, and Ben. 4 of the 5 were soon discovered, their biology having been irrevocably altered by the accident, and I'm sure longtime viewers of the channel and Marvelites in general can guess how. Every cell in Reed's body was replaced with pliable bacterial stacks, allowing him to stretch any part of himself considerable distances and contort into non-human shapes without injury. Susan, meanwhile, gained invisibility and force field powers, Johnny was rendered completely fireproof and endowed with the ability to emit flames from any part of his body, and Ben was transformed into a rocky-skinned, super-strong thing. Reed, Ben, and Johnny were found by the military and brought back to the Baxter building. However, Susan was briefly abducted by the rogue scientist, Dr. Arthur Molkovic, and the 4 soon tested their newfound superhuman powers in a battle with Molkovic's genetic creations. In the midst of all of this, Victor was returned to Europe, where his mutation transformed him into a techno-organic entity with armored metal skin and cloven hooves. In this form, he also possessed various offensive abilities, including the power to eject spines from his metal skin and emit poisonous gas from his mouth. Reed and his allies soon tracked Victor to Copenhagen and hoped to learn the altered superposition codes so they could attempt to undo their conditions, but Van Damme refused and sought to eliminate Richards and the others with a small army of mind-controlled servants. The ensuing battle essentially ended in a stalemate with the arrival of both American and Danish military forces. However, Reed did succeed in freeing Van Damme's slaves from his mental control before departing. After that, Reed and his friends continued to have more adventures, including a trip to the End Zone itself, where they clashed with an insectoid creature called Nihil. Eventually, they revealed themselves to the world at large as a public-facing superhero team, the Fantastic Four, with Reed Richards being dubbed Mr. Fantastic. Of course, in the midst of all of this, Reed and Sue had grown close and started a relationship. Reed even made contact with an older, alternate universe version of himself who was married to Susan and had 2 children, Franklin and Valeria. Now, when he actually tried to visit that other reality, he found it completely overrun with an unstoppable zombie plague, but that's a whole other story. Having already been infected but maintaining his intellect, the Reed from the zombie universe tried to trick his younger counterpart into giving him access into his dimension, allowing the plague to spread to Earth 1610, but in the end this scheme was thwarted by the ultimate Fantastic Four. In any event, Reed was convinced that he and Susan were meant to be together, and he attempted to balance their relationship with his obsessive love of science and their continuing superhero exploits. However, they eventually came up against their universe's version of Thanos, who in this reality was the godlike ruler of an extra-dimensional empire called the Endless Resurgence. Thanos attempted to coerce Reed into building for him a cosmic cube, a device that would allow him to completely subvert the wills of his people and rule without question. Reed refused, and the FF escaped from the Mad God's clutches, but unbeknownst to the heroes, Thanos succeeded in mentally implanting a desire to build the cube into Reed's mind. This drive soon became an obsession as Reed became increasingly fixated on the project as the weeks went on. This strained his relationship with Susan as he rebuked her attempts to convince him to rest. The whole situation eventually led to another confrontation with Thanos, but Reed secretly ensured that the cube would respond to the Mad God's desire for death by killing him when he attempted to use it. But even after Thanos' role in Reed's obsession was exposed, Susan was unable to forgive her boyfriend's treatment of her and put their relationship on hold. She expressed an interest in exploring other romantic partners more casually, and even had a brief dalliance with the ancient Atlantean criminal Namor. Susan and Reed slowly began to reconcile over their shared love of science, and Reed started planning to propose, but then the world was rocked when New York was hit with a devastating flood, one that was orchestrated by the mutant terrorist Magneto, and served as the opening salvo in the incident referred to as Ultimatum. Susan Storm was able to prevent the devastation from being as bad as it could have been by using her force field powers to push the water back out to sea, but the effort required for such a task overtaxed her body, and she fell into a coma. She was brought back to the Baxter Building for urgent care, but rather than stay by her side, a vengeful Reed went out in search of the one responsible and joined forces with Victor Van Damme, Nick Fury, and others in opposing Magneto. In the end, Magneto was defeated and killed by those who assembled against him. However, Susan awakened feeling betrayed by Reed's absence. Making matters worse, she learned that her and Johnny's father had been killed when Manhattan was flooded. At the ensuing funeral, Reed intended on asking Susan to marry him, but she put an end to their relationship. In the wake of this, the Fantastic Four broke up, and Reed begrudgingly moved back into his parents' house. Within a week of all that, he was visited by a future version of Susan, who had become one of the many time travelers across the multiverse to wear the costume and identity of Kang the Conqueror. This Kang Susan brought Reed to her own time, in which the entire universe had been erased, and claimed that this would be his future if nothing was done to avert it. Determined to stop this from coming to pass by any means necessary, Reed began to put plans into motion, but with everything he had been through, it seems that Kang's revelations caused him to start slipping into madness. He began to view society as broken and mankind as corrupt and immoral. Deciding that he would have to force the world onto the right track, he relocated to the negative zone, where he established a base and created an army of monsters to do his bidding. Seeking to eliminate those who might interfere with his schemes, he used his creations to launch attacks not only on the likes of the infamous Roxxon Corporation, but also on various superheroes, as well as his former allies at the Baxter Building. In the midst of this, to throw suspicion off himself and continue working unimpeded, he made it seem like he was one of those attacked by destroying his family home, killing his parents and siblings, while simultaneously faking his own death. The other former Fantastic Four members subsequently launched an investigation into what happened and aided Spider-Man and Iceman in a battle against the creature that was ostensibly responsible for destroying the Richards family home. Ben Grimm was wounded in the ensuing fight, but his injuries seemed to trigger a metamorphosis into a new superhuman form, one that he was able to transform into and out of at will. The creature, meanwhile, was taken captive by S.H.I.E.L.D., however, neither Carol Danvers, Nick Fury, nor Hawkeye were able to get any answers out of it, and in the end it simply declared that it was created by its creator, and that from the destruction being wrought, a new world would rise, one filled with true promise. After that, the monster self-destructed in a way, expanding into an uncontrollable biomass that wrecked the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility where it was being held, much like what happened to Roxxon and the Baxter Building. The whole situation started coming to a head when a teenage superhuman named Rick Jones got involved, sent by an alien race called the Watchers of the Universe, who had endowed him with cosmic powers. During a subsequent battle with the Kree hero Captain Marvel, who had been compromised and temporarily transformed by Reed, Rick Jones teleported away with Susan Storm, arriving at Project Pegasus, a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility containing numerous objects of unknown origin and unexplained power. With the door torn open, Susan went inside to investigate and found Reed Richards and his monstrous servants pilfering the facility for artifacts and technology. Initially, she refused to believe it could actually be him and tried to apprehend him, but when Reed attacked with a device meant to counter her powers specifically, an enraged Susan attempted to use her force field abilities to actually kill him. However, Reed's elastic body proved durable enough to survive the attempt, and he launched a savage counterattack. Susan was badly beaten by her former lover, but was ultimately saved by Rick Jones, and the two escaped to tell Danvers, Fury, Johnny, and Ben what happened. The situation finally culminated with the former Fantastic Four members and S.H.I.E.L.D. joining forces with Rick Jones, Captain Marvel, Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Dr. Octopus, and the Ultimates to invade the Negative Zone and launch a full-scale assault on Reed Richards' base. In the ensuing conflict, an infuriated Johnny Storm badly burned Reed, leaving him with a permanent scar on the right side of his face. In the end, the heroes succeeded in taking control of Reed's command hub, and while they didn't understand the technology he was working with, even with Captain Marvel's alien knowledge, Rick Jones was able to transport his computer, along with the stolen items from Project Pegasus, back to Earth. This caused the base to start falling apart, and while the invading heroes escaped back to Earth, Reed managed to evade capture and was seemingly stranded in the Negative Zone as a result. However, there was just enough material and technology left behind for him to cobble together a device to send himself back to Earth. More determined than ever to prove himself right and save the world by transforming it into a place that valued science and knowledge above all else, Reed Richards dubbed himself the Maker and founded a group of like-minded individuals to help achieve this goal, his Children of Tomorrow. To this end, they built a facility in Germany called the Dome, inside of which time would pass at a highly accelerated rate. Inside, they got to work building and constructed an advanced city, eventually run by a sentient artificial intelligence. Within the Dome, the Children of Tomorrow went through generations of rapid evolution over the course of 1,000 years, while only 5 minutes passed in the world outside. Reed, meanwhile, survived all this time as his powers rendered his body completely immune to the physical effects of aging, and he used his helmet to expand the shape of his brain, allowing him to think more efficiently. By this point, he'd also refined his stretching ability to the point where he could sprout not only additional limbs, but heads and torsos, allowing him to effectively create multiple conjoined duplicates of himself. Soon, the city began expanding outside of the Dome, engulfing large sections of Europe and killing millions of innocent people in the process. Meanwhile, the Maker sent his evolved children to launch an attack on Asgard that massacred its inhabitants. As a consequence of this, Thor was left weakened, but the Maker elected to keep him alive so that he could deliver a message to Nick Fury and the heroes of Earth. The city had finished growing, and if nobody attempted to enter their territory, he and the children would leave the rest of the world alone. In response to the situation, the President of the United States allowed the Joint Chiefs of Staff to take direct control of S.H.I.E.L.D. And as their first move, they sent the Hulk to attack the city, hoping that he could do enough damage to stop the Maker. However, Reed was able to talk the Hulk down and convinced him to join his side. The situation continued to escalate from there, with the president unleashing the United States' entire nuclear arsenal in a strike that cracked the Dome and did real damage to the city. In retaliation, the Maker teleported an antimatter bomb into the heart of Washington, D.C., killing the president, his cabinet, and the entirety of the United States Congress. Meanwhile, Tony Stark discovered a mass in his brain that appeared to be a sentient tumor, with the ability to interface with technology. Forming a plan in a last-ditch effort to stop the Maker, Tony infiltrated the city by allowing himself to be taken prisoner. And so while Tony Stark distracted the Maker, the supposed tumor, which he named Anthony, was negotiating with the city, convincing it, and by extension the Children of Tomorrow, to turn against their creator. This gambit culminated in Anthony forging an enormous suit of Iron Man armor out of the city itself, while the Maker injected the Hulk with a Giant Man serum, enlarging him to combat it. While the Hulk did gain the upper hand in this battle, the whole affair served to keep the Maker off balance, while Tony had Thor bring in the real secret weapon, Susan Storm. By working together, she and Thor were able to bring down the giant Hulk, causing him to crash into what was left of the dome. After that, Susan finally defeated and captured her evil ex-boyfriend, imprisoning him in a force field bubble. Reed was then locked away in a superhuman holding facility called the Cube, but was later freed by the future Susan Storm version of Kang, who still wished to use him in her efforts to avert the eradication of the universe. To this end, she forged a team of Dark Ultimates consisting of the Maker, the Hulk, and Magneto's son, Quicksilver. This group quickly set their sights on the reality-altering stones known as Infinity Gems. In their opening salvo, the Maker and his allies destroyed the Triskelion, stealing 5 of the gems that had already been collected by the Ultimates, and capturing Captain America and Hawkeye. Now, I will note that the shape, nature, and number of Infinity objects can differ in different realities, but in the Ultimate Universe there were a total of 8 gems, each one having been generated by some cosmic upheaval. In any event, the Dark Ultimates soon obtained a 6th gem, and within 24 hours the Maker created an army of robots called Herbitrons that he dispatched to force the world into a state of peace by subduing hostile nations. He abolished all patents and copyrights, allowing scientific and technological progress to become public domain, erased debt and eliminated the banks, making all currency effectively worthless, ended world hunger by rapidly producing fruits and vegetables, and provided free and clean energy to densely populated areas. The Dark Ultimates continued searching for the missing 2 gems and found that the supposed tumor Anthony was actually the 7th Infinity Gem which had formed inside Tony Stark's brain. The Maker extracted this gem, and while he didn't need to kill Tony to do it, after getting what he wanted, Richards severely lobotomized Stark, stopping his heart and lungs and simply letting him die. However, exposure to the gem had already altered Tony's neural pathways, allowing his consciousness to survive by transferring itself into the Maker's computer systems, where it could start sabotaging his efforts from within. Meanwhile, Quicksilver found the 8th and final Infinity Gem, but after using his super speed to look over the Maker's equations enough times to start to understand them, he realized that Richards would inevitably betray him by using the stones to create a world without mutants. He attempted to flee with the gem, but was intercepted by Kang Susan, who defeated him and took it for herself. Tony, meanwhile, marshaled his forces, and unsurprisingly, the whole affair culminated in a battle between the heroes of Earth and the Dark Ultimates, with the Maker and Kang arguing over which of them should wield the completed Infinity Gauntlets. In the confusion, Tony was able to claim enough of the gems to repair his brain and return his body, effectively resurrecting himself. However, shortly after he did so, the Infinity Gems disappeared, and the universe shook, with everyone present being beset by visions of alternate realities. Realizing that she was too late and that the end of the universe had already begun, Kang Susan fled into the time stream, leaving the Maker behind. Defeated and dejected, Reed was arrested and placed in the Cube once again. He remained there, but sometime later, Susan, that is to say the present-day Susan, came to visit him. She explained that they had detected an anomaly on the edge of space. Something that was enormous, immensely powerful, and headed right towards them. This entity had come from another reality, the Prime Marvel Universe, and sent Earth 1610 a warning that heralded its approach. A single word that foreshadowed its intentions. The World Eater, Galactus, declared its hunger. However, for that story we'll have to come back another day. If you want to read it for yourself, you can check out the event Cataclysm, The Ultimate's Last Stand, available both as a trade paperback and on Marvel Unlimited. In the meantime, thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!